There's 100,000 movies in this city. You don't need to know of any others except the ones I'm recommending you right now. You give me a time and a place, and I give you a 6-hour window. Anything happens in that 6-hour window, and you can blame me no matter what. Anything happens outside of that, and you're on your own. You understand? Good.
You are looking at the best movie trilogy you probably have never seen. 3 movies that helped pave the way for one of the most prolific Danish directors of the 21st century, Nicholas Winding Refn, who would go on to make successful and critically acclaimed art cinema classics such as Bronson, Valhalla Rising, and Drive. But not only am I here to inform you that you have been sleeping on one of the most satisfying movie trilogies ever made, but that this trilogy is one of the most creatively intriguing, best written, and genuine depictions of the criminal underworld ever made. Even more amazing is the fact that the Pusher series wasn't even intended to be a franchise in the first place, and it was literally made to help a struggling director out of bankruptcy, which obviously paid off in the end, leading to a fruitful career in Hollywood to make his flashy, stylish art affair that he's now known for. However, I believe Refn has not been able to top the trilogy that put him on the map in the first place. Now, drive enthusiasts, let me explain. I know you're about to get your hammers ready to beat the crap out of me for dissing your favourite crime fantasy, but I argue that without these movies, you probably wouldn't have Drive. It shares very similar themes and ideas. They're both about outsiders who've made a name for themselves in the crime world, and their attempts to stay afloat through all the drama that they bring to themselves and others. In this video, I'm going to go into how this series came to be, discuss the overall themes that run throughout the films, reflect on how this trilogy builds tension, and how it remains a raw depiction of the criminal underworld that many future filmmakers would be inspired by. This is my exploration of the crime saga that is Pusher, made up of the films Pusher, Pusher 2, With Blood on My Hands, and Pusher 3, The Angel of Death. I will do my best to not spoil the living hell out of this franchise, as it is best going into it completely fresh. More the point of this video is to provide an argument as to why you should check this incredible series out than to reveal specific plot points. But I will still warn you there will be slight spoilers ahead. Now join me as I push you into the deep end with the Pusher trilogy. 1995 was a year that remains a turning point in the Danish film movement, with the announcement of a new style of extreme filmmaking being aggressively announced via red pamphlets titled Dogma 95, an answer to the concerns of the time about the future of commercial cinema, which sounds awfully familiar to what we're dealing with at the moment actually. Dogma 95 was a movement that dared to push low-budget film production further than it had ever gone before, borrowing heavily from the auteur masters of the French New Wave. The founding men of this movement, Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg, wrote the manifesto in 45 minutes and announced it on March 13, 1995 in Paris. The goal of the collective was to remove all the expenses of Hollywood cinema with flashy special effects, explosions and technical wizardry that had been redefining cinema in the 90s, and purely focus on cinema that emphasized story and characters. Vinterberg and Trier produced 10 rules with which the Dogma films had to conform to. Being the ones leading the march, Vinterberg and Trier would start the wave with their influential movies The Celebration and The Idiots, films that embraced poor taste and nastiness and would go on to bring successful careers to both directors, maybe one more than the other for the wrong reasons.
What can I say? I understand Hitler, but
and helped inspire upcoming filmmakers around the world such as Jean-Marc Barr and Harmony Korine, and yes, even local Danish talents like Nicholas Winding Refn. While the first Pusher is not classified as an official entry into the Dogma 95 movement, it has such a close resemblance to the doctrine with its grittiness, cheapness, lack of technical polish, and well, Danishness. Its actual development began before the movement became a thing, when a young Nick Refn submitted a 5-minute crime short to get into Danish film school. Despite receiving an offer due to the film, in true avant-garde director fashion, he changed his mind, didn't see the need to waste a couple of years in classes, and thought he should immediately turn his short film idea into a feature film and fund it himself. Working alongside his friend Gael, they developed a full screenplay that structured the story's events throughout a week in the life of a drug runner, which remains intact in the final version of the first entry in the series. Being a huge admirer of cinema, Refn spoke about a variety of inspirations that helped form his idea for Pusher. From large city epics such as The Battle of Algiers, to video nasties like Animal Holocaust, to unsurprisingly gritty crime films from the masters William Friedkin and Martin Scorsese. Despite the films being made over a span of a decade, you won't find a series as complete as the Pusher series. A story that is organised and delicately handled, just like how Disney took a beloved franchise and made it even more loved by a passionate fanbase. All jokes aside, it's extraordinary that it worked so well considering it was never planned as a trilogy. The second and third entry were essentially a way to get out of financial bankruptcy for his production company at the time, that suffered from the box office disaster that was his first English language picture, Fear X, starring the Jesus himself, John Turturro. I suppose you could say they fucked with him, eh? While I claim I haven't seen the film, as it's hard to find a copy, so can't really dictate as to what went wrong with this film, it still left Refn in a bad situation, where the career he had started for himself was close to fizzling out. The creative man he is, he couldn't see this happening, so he had the idea to go back to the drawing board, to extend on what was at this point his most profitable movie. While resorting to banking sequels to make a profit would usually spell out disaster, Refn worked out how he could coherently work off the original film without ruining any of its influence or power, deciding to not return to the story of Frank, but expand on the lives of two central characters from the first film. And behold, you get a surprisingly seamless trilogy. The Pusher series is an example of a 3-part series that goes against the curse of trilogies, usually the third being the worst, and allows the films to feel equally necessary to the overall plot, while also presenting unique and fascinating perspectives on the pitfalls of crime. Each film builds on top of the other, building a tense saga that is rich in character and detail. Characters will pop in and out of the films, building a cast that will develop over the course of the films. Again, like another certain trilogy. Somehow Palpatine returned. The series examines the lives of individuals who are caught in the trap of criminal enterprise, with all the glamour that gets associated with the drug lifestyle. Pusher shows an unglorified depiction of this type of lifestyle, a world that, much like the use of the drugs some of the characters take, only provides a temporary high, but ultimately leads to debt, emotional damage, and essentially hurts everyone involved. As a result, it's a crime series that doesn't shy away from the brutal reality. 3 films cover a decade in the Copenhagen crime underworld, taking the perspective of a drug dealer, a jailbird, and a mob boss. Smartly chosen, as it allows the films to build a clear hierarchy to the crime world, much like any workforce. It shows that no matter the individual, no matter their level of power, everyone who plays the game is in danger of being swallowed up and being spat out. One might be living it up as a successful drug runner with good connections, but that can all come crashing down one fateful day. One might be finally free from the hellish confines of the prison system, but one will find difficulty adjusting back into society. One might be at the top of the food chain dealing a successful empire, but they also have to look out for the new kids on the block applying new rules to the streets and threatening hostile takeover. Everyone is a small fish in this ocean of money and drugs and are fighting to stay alive. Each film presents a unique perspective, stepping into the shoes of a protagonist with a completely different mindset and power position, meaning a series of movies that stay original and fresh with every new installment. Even the way the films are presented fit extremely well to the character that they're presented from. For example, the first film's aesthetic is super low budget, but it suits the character of Frank really well actually. As an aggressive, vengeful man who's being led down a path of self-destruction, it feels right his story is presented as a dark odyssey, and I can even say the film gets darker the more Frank loses control. There are scenes around the end of the film which are almost impossible to watch without squinting. The second film, made almost a decade later, is a much more flashy and colourful film, while also retaining that gritty look. Definitely higher budget cameras and production, but also a clear effort at producing a different aesthetic and tone, with bright neon colours that really bring to life this alienating, violent, aggressive world that Tommy finds himself in. The camera presents Tommy pathetically, often from a distance, and lingers on him as the people around him treat him like the class clown or fool. The irony of him having the tattoo respect on his head for a character who receives anything but. And then the third film, which focuses on the mob boss Milo, oddly enough goes for a different feel altogether, a much more reflective experience, with very little action for most of its runtime, and having a rather melancholic tone, befitting the character's older age and having to contend with his level of disrespect and lack of achievement in his life. Having all the money in the world but not living up to anything, just being a tool for his ungrateful daughter to abuse and his competitor drug mules to use and intimidate. In fact, upon seeing it, it's a rather anticlimactic conclusion to the series, but it makes total sense to go this way, befitting the emotionally repressed Milo. Especially when the last act of the film does eventually kick into gear with an extreme act of violence and debauchery. The Pusher franchise is a series about survival. No matter who you are, you have to watch your back and have to be one step ahead of your opponents. What may seem like a lucrative business for fast money is often an industry of getting into bad debt. And since every second could be their last, most of the characters end up getting into further debt to pay off others, further diminishing clean exit strategies out of the lifestyle. This is not a world for dumb financial decisions, but in some rare occasions when characters are able to pull the parachute out with all their debts paid, they scurry to find life affirmation in outside influences. Which brings me to the wonderful character development found in this series. Now, a quick opinion on the director. I think we can all agree Nicholas Winding Refn's strong suit has always been his visuals. The Neon Demon is a biting satire of the fashion industry, sure, but I bet you appreciate the visuals and music more than you do the cannibalistic saga of the story. Hell, I think even Drive fans will admit a huge drawcard to that film is its neo-noir aesthetics. Pusher, on the other hand, was a time and proof that Refn has a real knack for characters though as well, attempting to not jump the gun with action moments, but take his time on building character. The three central characters of Frank, Tommy and Milo are brilliantly brought to life by their respective actors. Each one gives a fantastic performance that is up there with some of the best ever presented in the crime genre. While Frank is given the short stick only appearing in the first film, it's expertly crafted how Refn used the first film to build on characters into the sequels by giving further detail into two great characters that play an important part in the first installment. It started the wonderful pattern of the films in bringing random appearances of characters. It's quite common for small-time characters to turn up in future films with their own development going between the films. One excellent example of this is Milo's Muscle, who in the first one is just your typical Eastern European thug. It's a side character that you wouldn't really pay attention to normally, but there's an interesting moment in that first film where he speaks to Frank about his dream of life outside Milo's criminal underworld, where he wishes to open up this idea of a takeaway restaurant. And I don't know if this was always on the cards for Refn, but 10 years later in the third film, he actually sees this through. And it's not done in a really hokey, forced way. It's molded into the plot of the third film very naturally, but it's done so naturally you have to applaud Refn's efforts to bring closure to one of the smaller characters. It's just a fine detail that really makes this world much more believable and bigger. It becomes a treat seeing which character will be given further exploration. One small role in one film will turn into a huge role in the next film. Now Disney, take notes, this is the way you build characters. Not only will it benefit and make your characters more relatable, but will bring so much more life to the world you create on screen. Another thing that the Pusher series excels at is tension. Jesus Christ, there are some heart-pumping moments in this. Probably helps since the films were presented in very documentary-style, on-the-field perspectives. But what's fascinating, a lot of the more shocking moments are purely implied and shown off-screen. The vicious disposal of bodies, the near-death beatings, the aggressive killings. But what makes these moments impactful are not the crimes themselves, but the lead-ups to these crimes. One of the best moments in the series is found in part 3, where Milo stands in the background as a criminal transaction of an underage institute is undertaken. And the camera just follows Milo as we wait for something to happen. The scene goes on for what feels like an eternity as we draw conclusions as to who will snap first. I won't say how it ends as I don't want to spoil the wonderful moments ahead, but this is just one example of how tension is beautifully built up to give a wholly uncompromising vision of the criminal underworld. I've spoken about how these films have influenced and paved the career of the director at the heart of the films. Watching them 2 decades later, I really noticed how groundbreaking these films would have been for the time. Coming into the 90s, crime cinema really saw a move away from the romanticism of the Godfather series and ushered in a grittier take on the criminal world. With films like the French cult classic La Haine, the edgy style of David Fincher with Seven, hell, even the dirty comic book aesthetic of Guy Ritchie with Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. And yeah, I'd consider Pusher another one of these. Many could argue this wave of darker crime cinema was due to the growing cynicism in the world at the time. A generation that was growing up on television that would show constant coverage of crime filling the streets. The style also showed that there was a return to the gritty aesthetic that the 1970s cinema was starting to introduce, but got interrupted by the flashiness of the 1980s. Seriously, Scarface, what the fuck did you do to crime cinema, brah? There was a gritty aesthetic that really led to an explosion of really dramatic, character-focused, and films with very down-to-earth human performances, showing the growing amount of drug addiction and homelessness, and the recognition that the face of crime wasn't just cigar-smoking Italians with fedoras. It was much more ordinary than that. And Pusher excels at capturing this authenticity in presenting the crime world on screen. Most of the characters are people we would easily see on our bus trips, walks at night, just your ordinary citizen, people who live double lives just to get by. While this style is very recognizable to the 90s aesthetic, I think it's safe to say now that what the 70s did for 90s crime cinema, the 90s is doing to the recent crop of crime genre cinema, with an extra component of television. And hell, just look at the show that is quite often considered the greatest piece of television ever made, David Simon and Ed Burns' The Wire, the most documentary-like on-the-streets approach of the crime world that many have argued has not been succeeded. Yeah, I definitely believe Pusher would have helped with that approach. Pusher Trilogy is extraordinary. I've been obsessed with world building recently, as you can probably tell with my prior video about Spirited Away, which you should also check out. But these films are also a wonderful example of how effectively tone and characters can be built with the right vision and talent. It's a shame that Nicholas Winding Refn has moved on to more stylistic and, in my opinion, less substantive work. But rewatching the Pusher films proves to me that what he's capable of is honest-to-God filmmaking that really should be appreciated more. While my favourite of the films is the second part, I have to say you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't check them all out. And it's in my opinion one of the best movie trilogies that you probably have never seen.